Good afternoon and welcome to the latest podcast from Radical Visions. Francis and I are joined today by two distinguished, venerable colleagues of many years standing. We're joined by Emma Soanes, who has recently taken up the role of Chief Executive Officer of Down Syndrome Scotland, and Simon Duffy joins us again from his room in Sheffield, where he leads Citizen Network in the role of director.
I'm in Doncaster, John.
Oh, have you not made it home?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
I'm in my second home, which is Doncaster. In the offices of People Focus Group.
Right, okay.
Partners.
So we're in Doncaster, we're in Troon, are we, Emma?
No, I'm in Glasgow today.
You're in Glasgow?
I'm using some shared workspace with the Scottish Commission for Learning Disabilities today.
Ah, good stuff. I'm in Biggar. Francis is in Greenfoot or Coatbridge or
Greenfoot.
Greenfoot. There's many ways to describe it. So we're going to go back in time 30 years, exactly, to 1996. And we've spoken before on these podcasts about how the organisation Inclusion Glasgow came together. And what we have today with Simon, Francis and Emma are some of the very earliest employees of the organisation. So we're going to explore a wee bit about what that was like, starting out with this brand new organisation with its distinctive ideas about what it wanted to do, but also trying to put those ideas into practice in a kind of relatively chaotic context, with the closure of Lennox Castle dominating the agenda. So I think my first question is going to be to Emma, and if Emma could maybe just describe what you were doing in '96 before Inclusion Glasgow and how you came to be involved in the work there.
Absolutely, John. I'll try and keep it to what's relevant. I won't tell you everything I was doing in 1996. So yeah, in 1996, I had been working in social care-ish for quite a few years, partly on a voluntary basis, partly and latterly on a paid basis. And one of the things about I was working in a residential facility at the time, where I'd been working for a number of years, working predominantly with adults with physical disabilities and learning disabilities. Loved the job, absolutely loved where I was working, loved all the people that I got to work with. But it was fairly unstable in terms of employment and hours and things like that. So it was a time of lots of bank work and 0 hours and all of these kinds of things going on. So I had a very practical issue, which was I really wanted to buy a house and I couldn't do that on these unstable working conditions. So I made the decision to step away for a short period of time to take on what was considered a more, or what the banks considered to be a more stable job, and went to work at the Herald newspaper for the minimum amount of time I could possibly work there to just convince a bank to give me a mortgage. So while I was there, I worked in recruitment advertising, and one day as I was sat at my desk with my little Madonna headset on, this chap called Simon Duffy rang up and said, "I'd like to place an advert, please." And I got all of the details, and I remember going home that night and saying, "Oh my God, someone placed an ad in the paper today and it's my dream job. Like if I could knit the dream job, this would be the one." And it was for an organisation I'd never heard of, called Inclusion Glasgow, and the little bit of information within it just spoke to me. I just thought that describes what I want to do. And
did you betray that? Did you betray your interest during the first conversation?
Not during that initial interaction. I went home, and then with my Herald newspaper hat on, I rang Simon and said, it's Emma from the Herald, to which Simon said, oh, is everything okay with the advert? I said, yes, it absolutely is, but I'd like to apply for the job, please. I think I did also reassure Simon that I had in fact placed the ad. I wasn't, myself. So I did, yeah. Whoops. So I did.
Remember?
So I did. I promise I did place the ad. And Simon very graciously said, yes, you can apply for the job. Everybody's welcome to do so, and I did. And I met. I was thankfully invited to an interview, and I met Simon a week or so later. And yeah, that was my first. That was how I heard about Inclusion Glasgow. That was the first time I met Simon. And yeah, it was a little random, but I like to think maybe not. I like to think maybe there was, a coming together of the planets aligning, or whatever what you want to call it. But yeah, that those couple of weeks changed my life completely, forever.
So first impressions then, those first couple of weeks, what struck you?
So after I started,
Aye.
I think so having worked in different places before, you've always got this thing about you turn up to somewhere, and especially when you're younger as well, and you're desperately trying to fit in, and you're desperately trying to be what everybody wants you to be. And I think turning up to work at Inclusion Glasgow, and I use work with inverted commas around it, because for a long time it didn't really feel like that. It felt like being part of this really cool club where you could just be exactly who you were, and people were just really pleased that you were bringing your stuff to the table and felt that it had some value. And so yeah, the first few weeks we were in a new office. It needed a bit of TLC. We were painting the walls ourselves, and just all hands on deck. We were in boiler suits, buying chips at lunchtime and hanging milk out of a window because we didn't have a fridge and we had to keep it cool somehow. And I guess that was probably the very early iteration of when something just needs to get done. How does a few people come together and just get it done? I think the setting up of the office and getting us off the ground was almost a bit of a metaphor for how we behaved as an organisation moving. We got better organised, I would say, but but from in principle, that was that was very much how it was.
And so there's something there about sort of collaboration. Random was a word you used as well. We got a bit better organised as we went on, kind of thing. But Simon, how important to you was setting that kind of tone of kind of openness? And
yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't think of it consciously like that. I think of it's a combination of my gifts and personality flaws. So like I'm not very good at disguising what I think. I'm not, although I can be very strong in one way, I actually know that I don't know all the answers. So I know that. So I'm also not bad at facilitating things, but yeah, it's a little bit like, I think I just brought all of myself into that process. And also, to be frank, I was very conscious of having a strong vision of where we needed to be, what people's rights were, how we needed to work differently. My experiences before had led me to this kind of sense of like purpose, but I knew I didn't know how to do it. So I was making decisions based on what I'd learned through my experience, what I'd learned through meeting different people, running different organizations, some of the experiences I'd had in the States, and opportunities to learn from things John O'Brien had pointed me to and other allies. But it was like a lot of things we didn't know, and we didn't know that it was a very insecure financially as a business. It was all crazy, wasn't it? I mean, it was you, John, that had guaranteed us a bit of funding, and I had a spreadsheet where I could make it work if we could get 20 people out in, I think, 18 months or something is my memory now. And like I'd invent salaries for roles that nobody had ever had before. So Emma and Francis and Steve, and I think, create this coordinator role, thinking, well, I need somebody. I can't just be me trying to set up all these arrangements. So I need somebody to help. Like and you invent ratios and percentages, and I quite like that system stuff. But I do remember, I have a very vivid memory of quite early after Francis had joined, and we had this, like, in that, you remember, in the Templeton Business Centre, no, not the business centre, the carpet factory, we had like one open plan space, then this weird kind of glass box where we would have little team meetings. And again, I think I'd done my classic thing of kind of arguing strongly about A, B, or C that I thought was very, very important. And Francis kind of, I don't know how she put it exactly, but it was basically, I think, finding out, can you actually disagree with Simon? And was quite relieved when she found she could. But I don't think that was really a thoughtful culture. I think it was like, of course you can disagree with me. I love arguing because disagreement is how you learn stuff. But actually, that's not normal. People don't do that. So, like, exactly what you said, Emma, like, young people often are trying to please. They think that's what they're expected to do, and that's not their fault. That's what society's done to them. I just a rather unusual upbringing, really, I think.
I think
So
what's
Francis,
interesting, John, in terms of setting the tone, is
Yeah.
that one of the things that Simon did, which was really brilliant, was, if I'm going to have this merry band of people who we all work together to genuinely try and change the world, then we need a mixture of different skills and approaches and attributes and so on. And Fran and I joining the organisation, we're probably, as time's gone on, similar in lots of ways, but really we're chalk and cheese in terms of what we actually brought to the table. Francis had a proper senior role, understood about organisations, understood about culture and structure and how all of that should work. I was as green behind the ears as any human could possibly be, and just came in with a complete naive belief that, but what we shared out of all of that was Inclusion Glasgow. Nobody ever came and said, why are we doing this, or why should we do this? We just always said, why not? If something needed to get better or something needed to be done, that was the attitude. And so whatever we all brought to the table in terms of experience or skills or whatever, that was everybody.
Can I just say there, and I think it's important for the context of this, why don't you share what age you were when you joined that in that role?
Yeah, so I was 20.
20. So you had everything you needed for a 20-year-old.
Thank you.
Well, I was in my mid-30s probably, and Simon was a bit younger than me. So yeah, and I had been around a wee bit. But it was a new
31 and 2 days the day I agreed my deal with John. So that's like, I know exactly right.
Wow.
Just youngsters, yeah. Francis, you came in a wee bit later than Emma.
As we were saying earlier on, I think we went for the same job. It was the same recruitment process. I had I'd already met Simon, and I had been doing some of the work. I suppose some of the work in Scotland, to think about what we needed to do to change really the system, to try and really actually meet people's needs in a much more person-centered way, much more individualized way, rather than this kind of group approach that was still happening, trans-institutional approach that we were still working with really in organisations. I was working for another organisation. We were still helping 12 people leave a hospital. We hadn't met them the week before. They were moving into a house together. Do you know what I mean? These kind of and I'd be like, this isn't acceptable, because it was just, I knew that while we were shutting the hospitals, we were still creating small institutions. So I'd been on that journey. I'd met Simon, and I was actually up with the other organisation at Lennox Castle, John, where you were working to try and help shut the hospital in a leadership role. And my job at that point was to try and recruit staff to the organisation I was working with. And Simon was in the next wee pod. Do you remember?
Yeah, only vaguely, actually. Yeah.
I'm like that. So I'm up there. To be honest, I wasn't trying very hard to recruit staff. At that point, I was just like there. And then Simon was next door, and he had his flip chart up, and his diamond person and that, and the name of the roles, and I was like, oh, so you got a job? What's the job? I'm in trying to find out what you. And I was like, oh, but I was, as you say, I was an area manager in the other organisation, and so it was a wee bit of a leap of faith, I think, in terms of what you were able to, well, you were offering in terms of that job and the role. But for me, it was a no-brainer. It was dead exciting. It was absolutely, well, an opportunity to do something from scratch, something different. And I think it's just about saying that. It was, Inclusion Glasgow started from, as you do with a new organisation, from nothing. But it also wasn't following a pattern of any other organisation.
Yeah.
We weren't just taking what other organisations would do and repeating that. So we had to do what you were saying, Simon, is really kind of work out how are we actually, if we really want to behave differently, we have to and provide something that's very different. We have to work out how to do that. And we also have to have an organisation that's organised in a way that supports it. And so every bit of it we were learning as we went along. And I suppose that's how we describe it, as knowing what we wouldn't do. Knowing how so we knew that we would not ask people to live together because they had a label. We knew we wouldn't do that because of money, because it would save money. We knew that we wouldn't refuse to work with MD because of their reputation. We knew there was a whole load of things that we said, look, we'll put these clear things about what we would do. What
The
we probably,
non-negotiables.
eh?
The non-negotiables.
But we weren't 100% sure that we really knew, and I don't think we did, let's be honest. We knew we were going to work one person at a time. We knew we wanted to start with people in their families and their lives that existed now. We knew that we wanted to use planning in a way that probably hadn't been used well before. So we started from those places, and we knew what we wouldn't do. But we then had to work one person at a time to try and work out. And a massive.
So there was a commitment right at the beginning to individualization. There was a commitment to
ordinary housing was another rule. Just not building anything or grouping anything or knocking walls down so 12 people could live together.
There was a commitment to the concept of no exceptions.
No exceptions.
Yes. And
so
also, Fran and I, although we came from very different job roles and levels of experience, there was definitely a consistency around because I think for me, having working directly with people, providing support, which I loved. I mean, I loved that job, but I also saw lots of stuff where I thought that's not okay, that's not right, or that's rubbish. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not good quality. And then you find, I think, especially when you're a bit younger as well, and you're perhaps seen as a little bit of a stirrer because you're asking questions about things, and management structures in big traditional organisations don't want to hear the whippersnapper bank member of staff saying, I don't think that's very good, or I don't think we should be doing that. So then you find your tribe, because you find all these other people in Inclusion Glasgow who are also going, nah, that's terrible, we're not doing that. That's
and there's something in there, Emma, isn't there, about your accountability being to the person and not to the organisation, or your primary loyalty, etc., being located somewhere different than maybe the organisation would want you to have it.
I think as well, can I just say this? I think it's important that Emma, coming from where she came from, she was just so open and enthusiastic and believed that anything was possible. And so she just brought this, didn't she? Whereas I think, if you've been around a wee bit, you've kind of, I would have probably brought a bit of the, well, wait a minute, how are we going to do that? There was a wee bit of me having to play that role to some extent, but there was just something fabulous being in a room with you when we were up at the hospital, Emma, because you were just, so positive and optimistic, and you really 100% believed,
I really did.
Absolutely, and so did I, but you just so that just came, and why wouldn't you? Because you hadn't been hit with the difficulties maybe that people had faced
But
in the
see
same way.
if you're so naive that you don't think there are any obstacles, you actually don't see 50% of them at all. Like, you don't, because you're not looking
But
for
that's
them.
what we needed, didn't we? We
Yeah.
needed that mixture of kind of, and you definitely brought that energy and that optimism and that positiveness, and anything was possible. And you put yourself into so many, you just threw yourself into everything, didn't you? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's fantastic. And yeah, honesty, I think, was very important. I mean, you did, even if you'd felt like you were a bit suppressed somewhere, I think I always felt like you were honest about mistakes, you were honest about what you saw going on. Yeah, so it was a dream having you, yeah. And we employed all sorts of folk in the end, didn't we? And I make mistakes quite often, but we did get a great gang together. It sounds a bit like punk rock, doesn't it? Really, I think that's what it's a bit like a punk rock revolution in care.
Yeah. Mhm.
it
So
was.
the other thing that inclusion became noted for as time went on was how it used the money that was coming out. So how, Simon, was that coming from you principally? That
I think that
set of
was,
ideas around the money, or how did
yeah. I
that?
mean, I actually wrote a book in '96 called Unlocking the Imagination, which set out that idea. I'd been working on these things in London, trying to basically finagle money out of existing community care systems, if you like.
Mhm.
I had always just felt like, again, that was my naivety. I was at that age, I was a bit older than Emma, but not much older, coming into these systems going, well, this doesn't make sense. So I'm going through some of this in those systems, like Emma's describing, and go, well, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we keep talking about inclusion and choice and control, and yet we've got all the money, all the power, we make all the decisions, but it's their money. This money only is there because of. So I was figuring out solutions in pretty decent community care systems, I would say, but facing all the resistance that we're familiar with. And when I was working, when I came to Scotland in '95, I was articulating the case for individualised funding. And of course, remember, John, as you know, and this is part of the early stages, I'd actually was still conceiving it really as a kind of covert service brokerage strategy more than service provider. So individual funding was just like my basic starting point. And then over time, we realized, actually, again, Francis clearly pointing this out to me, but we had to employ the staff. There were no providers able to do what needed to be done. It was just
But
not realistic.
Simon, see that at that start. See, starting from that point, I think that's why the organisation was very creative right from the start and thought very differently and did things very differently. And I think it's because we started there. If we'd started, we would have ended up behaving like any other organisation. We would have had to, we'd been forced to say, well, if you're an employer, you have to have this in place, you have to do that, and we never started there at all. We actually had an agency. We set up a different organisation to employ the staff employment for a while. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Support for inclusion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the direction. How did that happen? This other organisation employed the staff until we eventually realised that there wasn't going to be another solution. And that was because we were so far ahead.
Yeah.
Another thing that we need to just mention was, in your mind, I think, Simon, we thought we'd be able to get direct payments for people. Direct payments came in 1996 for people with a physical disability, but not a learning disability. So internally, what you did, what hadn't happened anywhere before, was created a structure internally where every individual had their own budget within the organisation, holding it in that person's behalf, and then that money being used to provide the support and a good life, whatever was coming from that.
That's right.
Idea of a good life for that person from that budget, and that budget could be used creatively, and it could be used for all, lots of different things.
Yeah.
This is 1996, 97, way back. So,
I suppose, and what I'd add, I think that's absolutely spot on. And again, I don't think this is to my credit. We probably would have still hung on to the creativity, because the sad thing about me is, like, I'm a bit obsessive. Like, I've seen this problem and I wanted to crack it. I couldn't believe that community care organisations had to carry on working in the way they were doing. So, like, I did approach it a little bit like an intellectual problem. So, I was actually doing my PhD in philosophy at the same time as doing this job, and it's not. I mean, I loved the people and the stories and the successes, and I hated, but learned from the failures and the pain, but there was overarching a sense of, no, I've got to prove that things don't have to be like that.
And they don't have to be massively expensive to do it in this way.
And it has to be no more expensive, really, systemically, to do the right thing than to do the wrong thing. I mean, so yes, and again, I know I pushed the organisation's limits at times around that, trying to keep the costs low. But because, I felt like we wouldn't liberate the system. And I kind of feel like, as well, a little bit like I look back and I'm so proud. It's the thing I'm most proud of, but also, like, I kind of can't believe how little progress we've made since. Like, I proved it, everybody. I proved it.
We were the most creative when we had the least money. That is just a reality. I've worked at different times through the years in the system with Inclusion Glasgow and outside, but I think a lot of the time creativity is driven by that, kind of resources being limited, and you actually start to think differently. You become more creative, and you bring people with you in a different way. Families maybe start to get on board in a different way and think differently because you know what the boundaries are in terms of a budget or whatever. So I think, I mean, I think it was a challenge. I mean, it was, because we were also, and what we haven't said was, because of the work we were doing, Lennox Castle was obviously closing wards, and it was working out through a process of assessment that John was managing, who, what providers would work with individual people, and the people that came to Inclusion Glasgow, because we were offering such a bespoke, tailored, individualised approach, most of the people came from the challenging behaviour wards that existed in that at that time. I know that language is, but these were wards that existed with those labels on them, and people that were the freedom fighters, people that were telling us very clearly that there was no way they were ever going to go and live with Joe, who lives sleeps 2 doors down in that bed. There's no way I'm ever doing that. They were the folk that came to us because that made sense from your perspective. So we ended up working with people who had a lot of what would be seen to be quite complex trauma.
And there was a little bit of hostility as well from in terms of people who felt that those particular individuals, that it would never work, and it was almost in their interest to prove that it wouldn't, because just because I told you so. And I didn't pick up on some of that early doors. I think I was a bit oblivious to some of that, and it was only kind of latterly I sort of thought, oh, some people don't really seem to want this to to go well. I don't know. What's that about?
It's interesting, isn't it? Simon's proof of concept thing. There's that. I'm determined we'll prove the concept here, but you're having to prove it in the most kind of extreme sort of way.
We only ever were as good as the situation at that time, and as soon as that was passed and solved, we were on to the next thing, and we were back to a lot of the same challenges and people's belief that it would happen.
So there's a generally hostile context where these
and I think that's the issue, that you haven't learned from that history. No,
that's right. It is the no exceptions part of the concept that you're proving.
Francis and I were having a conversation the other day and talking about that stickability factor, that you working with that person, so you stick with that person, and you'll have highs, you'll have lows, there'll be bumps in the road, it'll feel impossible one week, and then you'll have a breakthrough another week, and that's what working and sticking with a person looks like. That's what it looks and feels like.
It was a level of commitment, really, that
but that's people, and we're all a bit messy and complicated, aren't we? So that's kind of the deal. So
there's a context that says these people really we'll give this a go, but really they should be they should stay in institutions.
I also
And
think
there's
on reflection, John, I don't know if you felt any of this in terms of hearing the chatter at the, in the hospital, but I think there was a period of time where I'm not sure people took us that seriously for a little
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
We were these
Emma,
kind
you're
of
still, yes, you're absolutely right, dear.
careful freedom fighters who were, No, seriously, I can't tell you how oblivious I was to the politics at the beginning of this journey. I just assumed everybody was on board.
Well,
Because
you
why
weren't
would you
conforming.
not?
Part of your beautiful
you-
charm.
You weren't conforming to the kind of general expectation of what an organisation providing support
Yeah.
would look like. So, and there was a general environment where, hurry up, do this as fast as you can, and also do it as cheaply as you can. So you were part of that as well.
Right. Ironically, though, we did do it pretty fast.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that was a wee bit
Yeah.
interesting, I think, because we, and that again, that proof of concept that Simon's talking about, because people were going and living in ordinary housing, because we were just working one person, we could kind of get round people, and so for some people that seemed easier to maybe get a team around or whatever. So actually, we started to have results that I think other organisations weren't having at that point, because
So
we were in that way.
I'd be interested to hear the three of you talk about that. Because what we're talking about here is the things getting off the ground. People are being recruited. The office is being done up. We're getting our concepts and ideology in line, but we haven't yet supported anyone. What was that like, moving from the theoretical and the inspirational?
Simon had already started. To be fair, Simon was working with people. Before we were recruited. So Simon was.
I got 3 people out with no staff.
Right. So, sorry, I've forgotten any of that, Simon. Look, you tell that bit first, then.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to be brief. I think it's important we hear Emma's voice, isn't it? But I bang on for England all the time. Sadly for England, but the fact we helped there was a family that had 2 boys actually in an annex of like an offshoot of Lents Castle. And again, it was working with a family with lots of challenges and lots of reputational stuff, but just cutting through it really with some very radical thinking. Hey, let's help the family buy a new house, and let's help the family buy support in ways that work for them. And we got the boys out quite quickly with really, like for a third of the budget that was currently being spent by the NHS, and they hadn't even it would have been even more if they'd ship them off to some private thing. And then an older lady who had a husband and a home but was in Lents Castle Hospital. So and there were challenges, and so again Jean was our first employee as we helped her leave and come back to Glasgow. So again, and in a way that's part of the creativity Francis touched on, paying attention to what's already there. Like a big battle in both cases, but particularly with the family, was that the system didn't even want you to talk to the family.
Yeah.
And then exposing to them real choices, resources, and then enabling creativity to come out of those conversations. That was where a lot of the magic happened. And it was then trying to bottle that and repeat that. But in cases which were also, difficult, and where it became much more difficult. And this was a key challenge where
people had nobody.
No, people had nobody. So when people had nobody, you had to take different kind of risks. You have to make some different kind of decisions. And I'm really pleased we did. But for the
purposes of the podcast, we should probably just labour a wee bit what we mean by people had nobody.
Yeah. So people that had been in hospital for long periods of time, oftentimes that whole process of being institutionalised meant that all the normal kind of relationships that you would have, people didn't have any longer. So we were working with some people. We're working with 2 ladies, particularly where this was a massive issue for those 2 individuals, where they both actually, believe it or not, were in the same ward, and they both had the same first name. And they were around the same age. Do you remember, Simon? They were more or less. So, and interestingly, this was the kind of thing that it was difficult. But you know, if you'd taken their assessments from the hospital and went like that with
I
them,
remember this so
taking
well.
the
Yeah,
last name off,
it was cut and paste.
yeah, it was, there was just nothing there in terms of anything about their story, their history, their lives. And when you went in to meet with people, there was nobody around those individuals, and no belief, a bit like Emma was saying, that those particular people should even be living in their own homes in the community and having a life. That actually, what would be the purpose of that? Because they were seen, to be honest, as not.
And I actually remember
It's
having a
subhuman, really.
conversation.
It was like there's no point
No, and they, and like you say, with the
living in
two,
the house in the community and having a life, because they can't. And you're
they
thinking,
couldn't- yeah.
it was sorry, what?
No, just like you say about the two plans, which were there was nothing between you. You could have read one plan and read the other plan, and you'd have been looking at it was the same, for all intents and purposes, the same women, and then you meet them both who are so completely different. But I remember having a conversation with a member of staff in the ward about both of those women, who, because they were both in the process of going to be moving out, and one that they couldn't wait to see the back of, and one that she's no bother, so she could probably stay till after Christmas. And that was genuinely the rationale for why one should move faster than the other. Just you know, and that's just unbelievably sad, but also a little bit rage inducing. So then you're on it. You're like, nah, that we're moving on this very, very
I mean,
quickly.
in that situation with one of the ladies, it took us a long time to get a team around that person, because every time people went up to the hospital, they were being corrupted by the staff in the ward in terms of their views, what they thought. They've just been drip fed constantly. So people that were coming up fairly innocent
Really
and
hard, yeah.
were like, they're coming back saying, you know, actually I've been told this and I don't see how this is possible. And so we'd go next till we got a couple of people that were able to go up there and go, talk to the hand. They were able to hold it for the person and see something that other people couldn't see, and connect with that dream for the person and hold it for them. And then once that got out, there was two people that in that particular person's team that stuck with them for a good while, and one person stuck with them for the rest of their life, which is just unbelievable. For the whole that person who's passed now but was alive, she was massive in person in that person's life. So we, in that the way that we worked, it created relationship and connection, and it created opportunities for people like that to have, Margaret, to have relationships that didn't exist before, and for people who loved it when she didn't have that before. And that's what we learned, that we needed to kind of find ways of at least trying to
create something that wasn't there otherwise. Simon, you've got your hand up there.
It was just a little side note. I remember that the first lady we got out had also been on that same ward, and when I was chatting to her, she told us things that would have been useful to know. So it's a reminder that also, I don't think we did include in our planning other people with disabilities on the wards. So for all our creativity, I think we'd missed that trick. We did talk to the staff, and if there were family, the family, and the professional assessors and stuff. But I think we missed that. It would have been interesting, wouldn't it, if we'd used the intelligence of the inmates.
That's a bridge too far. Could you imagine that?
I know, we're causing enough trouble, But anyway, just a little side note. If we were ever to repeat this exercise.
No, I think it's a really good point, but I do think, and that was the thing, there was some points where we did have to say, look, we pushed and pushed, and at times we just had to say, right, well, this is as far as we can push. In some situations, I think in those, we had to do certain things to get people out.
And I think there was a couple of examples where we thought it would be good to know more, but we're not going to get any more, so we just need to do it and then work it out afterwards, because that's
Emma,
the person.
Can you recall the first person that you were sort of primarily responsible for?
Gosh, well, we worked kind of in sort of partnership a lot as well. So it wasn't so much, I think probably latterly when we were a bigger organization, and there was a sense that, right, these 5 or 6 people, I'm gonna be responsible for making sure everything's okay there. In those earlier days, it was a little less we worked a little bit more closely together. But yes, I can remember some of those early people, and I can remember, in fact, I actually remember that one man who I will never forget, who we worked with, and it was one of the person that was recruited. I didn't recruit her, actually. I don't know whether it was one of you guys, Francis and Simon. I can't remember when you recruited Suzanne, who's just one of the most marvelous human beings.
Another one of Simon's wonderful recruitment.
Yeah. Just so fantastic and so wonderful. And she was an example of just finding the right person for someone, and who then just wants to make their life the best it can possibly be, and that's their job. If they had to write their job description, that's what it would say. And and I remember the change for him. But I also remember some of the frustrations during the process, because he absolutely understood that there was an end goal and there was a house there and there was these people, and he was really desperate for that to happen and for the move to happen. And the time that it took to get there, I certainly felt that there were some examples of his time on that journey in the hospital where he was almost punished a bit for being the one that was almost out the door. And there was definitely resentment with, and I'm talking about members of staff and, people within the hospital. But yeah, I can remember some of the celebrations when people moved, and those celebrations are really important. It was important to say I'm home, and and mark that occasion, because very often what had happened the day before was you were picking someone up from the hospital with 2 black bin bags with their entire life's, everything. And so it's really important to say that's one chapter, and it's important because it's a huge part of your story. But actually, we are really positive and really celebratory for this next chapter. And the contrast was, it's interesting, because I think just when we talk about the kind of tone of the organisation, one of the things that Inclusion Glasgow did, another non-negotiable from day one, that wasn't a let's sit down and have a chat about this as a plan, it's just how it was, which was the use of language. So we didn't sit and have meetings about, I never heard much in the way of traditional support organisation chat at Inclusion Glasgow. We were very clear about what living in hospital was. It was incarceration, and that word was used a lot. People are incarcerated and we have to get them out, and we have to get people a life, and we have to help people get free. And that's how I saw it. I was on a crusade. There's no question about that. It was a mission, and I used to jump in my wee Corsa up and down to the hospital, and I was on that mission, and there was no question about it. So I was all in. But the other bit of language was about matching people, and I don't mean in a Cilla Black kind of way, but there was a real sense that if you find the right people for the right people, then amazing things can happen. And just as Francis was saying about, sometimes we would get people in and think, that's just not, that's not clicking. And when you got that right, so I can remember those first few people that I was working with, which we talk about decorating the office. We had a wall in the office in Inclusion Glasgow that had several sets of ladders painted on it.
I remember the ladders. Yeah,
and they were escape ladders. They were everybody's escape ladders. And from a selfish point of view, there was real joy in colouring in the last rung of the ladder. That was a good day at the office, you know.
So you had about 10 stages to go through or something for each person. Whatever number it was to get.
And so everybody.
I think there were 7. I think it was
7. Only 7. Yeah.
Of course it was, Simon.
Far too many.
There was a ladder, and Simon had done beautiful graphic ladders for each, and we would kind of as we achieved whatever parts of the person got their house, which would be massive, for example, that would go up. And if we managed to get the team together, and we did a lot of really creative stuff around recruitment. We did have these big events where we, even for where we didn't have those connections. Obviously you were brilliant, Simon, at setting that tone right from the start about looking for people around folk, or where people had been before, and was there any you know, but even where there wasn't, we had those big events where we invited people and we created personalised kind of profiles about people, and and we asked people to kind of go to the people that they gravitated to, that said something to
we
them.
said
Or
match yourself up, didn't we?
And,
you know,
again,
yeah. We had, I can remember the first time that we, I think we did a radio advert, and then we advertised for, and that wasn't really done then. It was Q96, which doesn't exist anymore. And we advertised there, and we had this huge event at the Swallow Hotel, which I don't think also exists anymore. and we had created these kind of sort of vision boards almost, that sort of created the picture of the person and all the stuff that they liked and stuff that was important to them. And then we said to people, come in and let's chat about the people who are looking for support, and who do you feel like really drawn to, and who you maybe share interests, or and yeah, and it really did work. And then you were able to come up. I remember we did that, I think we were recruiting for 5 people, and we'd not done that before, because that was the whole, is it still individual recruitment when you're, you know, recruiting for so many people at once? But actually it absolutely was. And people were coming up and saying, here's my application, and I've put on here, I would like to work with Margaret because I really enjoy doing this too, and I think her and I would get on well, or, you know, and it just made sense.
I think we're getting some sense, even just the things you're now talking about how a certain momentum grew, that you're beginning to.
The culture of the organisation was, you know, if something would be going on and suddenly Simon would say, right, could everybody please come into this office now? We'd all be in, and he would say, I've got, you know, whatever the problem was that you were dealing with or thinking about or struggling with, you would invite us all in. Talk and tell us what it was, and we would talk about it and get advice and thoughts, and it just was the most, I don't know, it was a brilliant way to work, and it was the most inclusive way to be part of a team, and it was creative, and it just created that whole culture really of equality. You know, everybody had a voice, everybody was equal. I felt, in terms of their voice was valid, you wanted to hear, you know, what everybody had to say. So you created such a fabulous culture.
Do you think it's a function of being younger? That I was a member of the Community Learning Disability team in the Borders in the 80s, and I could, you know, could share similar sort of stories or sense of collaboration and purpose, and you know, we had a mission to fulfill, kind of thing. But we were all, well, lots of us were in our 30s, 20s. Is there a function of being younger that and I'll maybe, given we don't have a huge amount of time left today, Emma, I'll maybe put this to you, so unfairly, but you've taken up this new job in Down Syndrome Scotland 30 years later. I wonder how much you feel you can carry some of that feeling and some of those ideas into that role.
It's really interesting, because I think you go on a bit of a journey. I think I definitely arrived at Inclusion Glasgow with, you know, experience of directly working with people, but not much experience outside of that, really, or of the world even, you know. So I kind of came along with a lot of that naivety, and then of course what you do bring is the ability to go, well, why don't we just do that, or why would we do that, or, you know, so you become, you're inquisitive, and not always super aware of some of the etiquette that exists in organizations or in boardrooms or in structures, and, you know, so you're not constrained or curtailed by any of that. So, and also you're not apologizing for it at that time because you don't know any different. So then you kind of get a bit more mature, and I can't tell you the horror I had when I first started working outside of Inclusion Glasgow, and realised for the first time that isn't how everybody does things, and it hadn't occurred to me that there was any other way of working. So then you go on this kind of career journey where you try really hard to hold on to the things that are really important, but inevitably you are a little jaded and bruised by some of the stuff that happens along the way, and that's life and work. But
Yeah.
but it is very hard not to be influenced by the stuff that goes on in traditional organisations, and you learn a little bit about the etiquette, if that's the right word. And then you come through the other end. And then, so probably in the last decade, I think I've genuinely thought, no, I need to get back to, you know, so it's not like you lose it necessarily. That's still who you are. That's still your heart. That's still your core. But the system will throw you around a little bit and kick you about, and you know, so trying to hold on to that stuff is quite difficult. I am very selfish and very personally hugely grateful to Inclusion Glasgow for what is now my approach, I think, to leadership in a big organisation. So now I'm very intentional about making sure I bring the things that worked for me. Simon and Francis really took a chance on me back in the day, and were very much of the opinion there's something in there that speaks to our values, and we can teach the other stuff, but there's a bit in the middle there that we can kind of work with. And I really, really try and do that now when people are coming into my organisation or I'm making those recruitment decisions. And I definitely try and I mean, what would Fran or Simon do is a constant mantra for me in lots of stuff that I do. So I really owe Inclusion Glasgow a great debt of gratitude, and I think the only way I can kind of honour that really is to try and make sure that I live those values, that culture, and that way of working in the organisations that I've been able to be part of in the last wee while. So I'm very excited about the next decade, but I think we're all very frustrated at how much there is still to do, and in some respects some things have been wound back as well. So that's very difficult to take. So that doing this is lovely actually, because it reminds us why we were so excited about it in the first place, and we need to do that as often as possible.
Great. Thanks for taking that question head on. Simon and Francis, any final thoughts before we wind up today?
Just musing on you, is it age? I like to think not, but I do think like managing your career becomes an objective for lots of people quite quickly, and then that, you know, and there are good reasons for that, because you've got to pay the mortgage, etc. But that's part of the gravity that drags us down, isn't it? You know, I think anyway, I won't get onto basic income and why we need a whole new economic system. I might still have the years in me to pull that off.
I think some of this is important though, Simon, because when you came to inclusion, and we're telling the story of inclusion, we've only just touched yet again the beginning of it, and having Emma and yourself here again is brilliant. But part of what you always had was a bigger vision. And a vision to drive a bigger change. And that was always part of what we were doing at Inclusion. It wasn't just what we were doing at Inclusion, was it really? I mean, and you took us with you, and then there was other people like John and other organisations, obviously, that we were able to work alongside and join with and be part of a movement, which was something really quite significantly spectacular in its time, I think, when we were doing that work. There is something about that we've never really been able to, we've never got, I think, I'm talking about Scotland, obviously Scottish, we've never got to that place again where there's that sense of that movement in a way that was then at that time. Right,
so
John?
no, I think what we're saying in winding up is we're just about to, and
especially with Emma,
says,
because Emma's not as old as we are, and we've already noticed. So you've got quite enough in your.
I feel as though we've created a perception that there's somehow some 40-year age gap here. It's quite that much. I've got a big special birthday looming.
Enough to change the world, Emma. You've got enough to change the world still. So
challenge accepted.
Inclusion went on, and we'll talk about that in other episodes, but we went on, didn't we, to then develop and grow other organisations, and we'll talk about all of that, because that was a big part of the legacy, I think, that Inclusion Glasgow was able to create by becoming this new and different organisation and way of working, really. But yeah, it was an amazing time. It was the best time. And to be fair, I have to say this, Simon, you being the director was the best time for me. The first 3 years where I was the deputy director was my dream job because I didn't have that overall responsibility. Then I had to, obviously, for the next 13 years or whatever. But so it was a nice place. It was a lovely place. Do you know what I mean? I felt as if I had lots of, with you, lots of, say and able to kind of influence and work with you in a very collaborative way all the time. But I was, I wasn't ready probably to take all that responsibility. I don't know how you did
I'm
it.
sorry. I
No, I
also
don't mean that in the first 3 years. I mean,
No, I
don't
know,
how
but
you did
I
it.
do feel bad about it. And I do remember Emma telling me, though, she'd spotted it. She said, "You're a bit bored now, aren't you?" And like I can remember, and that her
She's so
saying that.
cheeky, that Emma.
Yeah. And so I don't know. Yeah, but I do feel bad about that. That's a whole other story as well, isn't it? But let's leave that for another day.
It's not
Yes.
so bad about it. It was still, it was the right, I mean, I think hopefully it was the right thing. I brought a different part of the story to inclusion probably, which was we had to get on and do what we'd started.
Yeah.
And we had to show that we could do it again and again, and we had to hold on to it, didn't we? And
yeah,
in a way that
and listen, I had the
showed
enormous
longevity
privilege.
to it and all of that. So I think that's what I brought in some ways, along with other folk after you.
I think you definitely did. And I had the enormous privilege of being able to have both, the experience of both. And it just felt like a really natural journey. And I was able to take on a bit more responsibility as a wee bit of time went on, and you put that learning into practice. And that was a gift. So yeah, wouldn't change it for a minute.
No, I mean,
Big thank you to
Amazing.
Emma Soanes and Simon Duffy and to Frances Brown. Thank you all very much. And that's draws this particular podcast to conclusion. Look out for future episodes, as Frances was saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.